Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. I'm your host, Viz, and tonight we have two very special guests, Steve Shippey and Cindy Kaza from Discovery's new shock doc, Michigan Hell House, which is now streaming on Discovery Plus and on the Travel Channel. Guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you guys doing?
Good, thanks.
Doing good. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this chat. So let's just get right to it. Your new documentary, Michigan Hell House, is out. It's part of a series of shock docs that you guys have together now. I'm really enjoying them. Steve, I'm going to start with you. This goes back to a case that you have been involved with for over 8 years now, probably. Tell us how you first became involved with this case and the Pomeranian family.
Sure. So, kind of began in a interesting way. Somebody was reaching out to me for quite some time, maybe about a year on and off, saying they had something that they wanted to give me, something I needed to be aware of. Of course, it piqued my interest, but without knowing exactly what it was or who the individual was, I just kind of kept putting it off and saying, well, I need to know something before we meet. But I guess persistence pays off. Ultimately, I decided to meet this individual, and I was handed a box full of police reports and, well, all kinds of reports. After going through and reading some of this, I couldn't believe what I was reading. I didn't know how to make sense of it. I've never seen police reports obtain this kind of information using this kind of language about the paranormal. And so I started to reach out to some of the officers who had signed these documents and basically just simply said, does this address mean anything to you? And I put the address of the home. Didn't say anything else. And all of them responded right away. I wondered how long it would be before somebody finally reached out. Yes, I was there. Yes, this happened.
Wow, that's amazing. Cindy, you like going into these investigations with a clear, objective mind without any prior knowledge.
Yeah,
At,
right.
at which point did Steve fill you in on the history of this house and particularly his involvement with this case?
Yeah, so I mean, when I do the initial walkthrough, I like to go in totally blind. So I don't research anything on my own. I know that Steve had done a documentary about this before, but the reason I don't like to know anything is because what happens is when you walk into an investigation front loaded, your mind is already telling
Yeah.
yourself a story. And so it's super distracting. It's hard for me to know what's what. So usually what happens is I go in blind, then Steve validates me after and says, well, these are some of the things that we know. This is what you got right. But some of the stuff I don't know until the end. Like that's, fully validated until the end or not validated.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you got a chance to watch how this all began with Steven in his documentary. If you haven't, I highly suggest you watch it. It's really a fascinating story. Now, Steve, you opened this documentary with the quote, "This is like the greatest paranormal story you've never heard of." Given the magnitude of what happened to this family in this house, why do you think there was so little attention paid to it until you became involved?
Sure. Well, it's an interesting reason behind that. Now, the reason for that is because number one, the family wanted absolute privacy. They were, of course, very upset this was happening to them.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't want anybody to know it was happening to them. They just wanted it gone, no attention, no interviews, etc. However, beyond that, it was looked at as a criminal case for the longest time. The family, even for the longest time, believed that a person or persons were harassing them, stalking them. Law enforcement was actively trying to catch them through
Hmm.
stakeouts, surveillance, other kinds of things. It wasn't until it became clear that it was anomalous or paranormal activity taking place that they started to focus on that. And even then, they wanted no attention, no media attention, nothing.
And what surprised me, Steve, is this is going back to 1974. I mean, they, after all this time of trying to find out who's doing this, they put the word supernatural in the police reports. That's how frustrated they were that they couldn't come up with a viable person, that they actually documented in the police reports that this has to be something supernatural. Now, Cindy, what were your initial impressions when you either arrived at this location or even prior to?
Well, when I arrived at the location, the first night of the walkthrough, it was really crazy. I could really sense that there's a lot of poltergeist activity, like really violent poltergeist activity, and I could see, windows being shattered. We heard some crazy knocks coming from inside the house. And then we really got the craziest EVP that I've ever heard. It hasn't been matched to this
Yeah.
date. That was, terrifying. Like my reaction that you're seeing is real.
Yeah.
I really was very terrified by what we captured on that EVP. And, it was tricky because the first walkthrough was like, I knew there was more to the story. Like I knew there's something with the land and just trying to sort it out. But, you had to go back another time to really get settled into the energy of the space.
During the first half of the documentary, you mentioned you're seeing a shape shifting thing. You couldn't identify it, and you mentioned that that really scared you.
Hmm.
My question to you is if entity, whether it was a human soul or not, if it does not want to make itself known to you,
Hmm.
will you ever know what it is? Is there a way for you to find out what it is? Or if it doesn't want to be known, you're not going to know?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think if something doesn't want to be fully known, then it can make itself unknown. I'm still kind of in the space of mediumship. I'm always a student of mediumship, right?
Hmm?
And so it's interesting when I feel these energies. Like I said, I haven't encountered this before because in the investigation, I hadn't encountered something like that before. And to try to feel into this new energy and shape shifting, and honestly, I think I've learned I'm more afraid of what I don't understand.
Yeah.
So once I understand what I'm dealing with, it's not as scary. But until then, it's like, what are we dealing with here? And then I was like, thanks, Steve. Thanks for bringing me onto this case, because it's like,
What have you gotten me into? Steve, the Nightmare for the Pomeranian started back in 1974, like I just said. And the story goes about a person who lived across the street, supposedly practicing black magic into the occult and so on. In the years that you have invested in this case, in your opinion, what was the catalyst that set this off?
Well, I guess at this point, it would be hard pressed for me to believe it was anything else than what you had just said. And, simply because the family had built the house in 51 on land that was passed on by his father to him to start this new family, build a home. They lived there without incident from 1951 to 1974.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing,
Yeah.
never heard, saw a thing. And when the new person who arrived in the neighborhood came to the house and wanted to buy the house, for reasons unknown, I guess, and was very persistent. It wasn't until they finally had enough and said, "Look, it's not for sale. Quit asking. Kindly leave the property." And then that night is when it begins. I mean, that's very coincidental.
It is, and it's too much of a coincidence. Cindy, one of the ways that you communicate with the spirits is through automatic writing.
yes.
Please explain to our audience, which, by the way, there are a lot of people tuning in tonight to watch you guys. I thought I want to share
Thank
that
you.
with you. Uh, Explain what automatic writing is and how did it manifest for you for this particular investigation?
Well, I mean, automatic writing, it's just another way for me to connect to the spirit world. And it's a more like fluent or fluid kind of transmission because what's happening is I'm not hearing it and then writing it down. It's like coming through me through the pen onto the paper. So when you see me work in other, scenes where I'm having to interpret or hear or see visions and then like try to figure out what does that mean,
Hmm.
with automatic writing, it's just coming out.
Yeah.
So it's super vulnerable because I don't know what's going to come out and I see it the first time as everybody else sees it. So you're kind of just like, as a medium, you're like, well, I hope that I don't say anything crazy, And so, yeah, but that's like the risk that you take. But it's super useful in an investigation for me when I feel really overwhelmed and bombarded with energy, different things hitting me all at once. I can really get focused. So that's why I use automatic writing.
Nice.
Yeah. Hmm.
Now, Steve, the house is currently occupied by new people. They are having experiences, but the experiences are a little different from what the Pomeranians had in the 70s. How do you explain that? Do you think the going back to the 70s, Harold, the father, he was being targeted, therefore whatever was unleashed there was more vicious, and when he left, it stuck around, but not to the same extent.
Yeah, I would say that's exactly my theory. I don't know that it was Harold primarily that was targeted. I think it was the entire family. I think it was every member of that family because, there's so much information that, of course, you have to condense everything, even to fit into a 2-hour shock doc. But
Yeah.
you got to think there were nearly 1,000 reports, and Mabel had been injured as well, the wife. So I think all of them were targeted, and I believe that when they finally vacated that house, that's when the activity stopped being so ferocious. And I think that's why the new family, certainly it's unnerving what they experience.
Hmm.
Shadowy figures, things coming up missing, flashes of light, the feeling of being watched. I think for most people that's enough.
Yeah.
But thank God it never reached the levels again that it did during that horrific time frame, 74, 75.
Exactly. Now, Cindy, you mentioned poltergeist earlier. Let's talk a second about poltergeist. Uh,
Let's do it.
Noisy ghost. It's when basically stuff gets moved around without anybody moving it. There are several different theories behind poltergeist.
Mhm.
Poltergeist can be caused by a living person that can be nowhere
Yes.
near the location. Okay, it's a buildup of emotions and energy that sort of manifest themselves in just like telekinesis or something like that. And then you have poltergeist that is explained as a spirit picking something up, moving it, throwing it, and whatnot. What are your what school of thought are you in when it comes to poltergeist activity?
I'm all of the above because what I've seen in a lot of the investigations, that I've gone on, that I've had really, really intense poltergeist activity, is there's generally some sort of a psychic imprint left behind. So there's something maybe in the land, maybe it's elemental, who knows, right? Or maybe there's a huge tragedy on the land. So you have this underlying current of just massive psychic imprinting. Then you usually have somebody in the house who is super sensitive or open,
In this case,
right?
Dwayne.
Right, exactly. So you have Dwayne, and then you have, whatever was happening with
Mhm.
the sending over the energy and conjuring up, and then you have the turmoil in the family. So everything is just feeding off of
Each other,
everything.
yeah.
So, and then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So, I've found most of the time there's always somebody sensitive and open without that doesn't understand their gifts in the house too, and a lot of family fighting.
Absolutely. Steve,
Yeah.
I watch a lot of paranormal investigations, and I gotta say, you, bar none, have caught some of the most incredible evidence over the years that I have seen. Because I think you dedicate the time and energy needed to fully document and investigate these cases. With this case in particular, one incident involving a poltergeist, they were using a spirit board that spelled out the word knife. And then moments later, a knife got thrown across the room. I mean, that is something straight out of a horror movie. When people tell you a story like that, what goes through your mind?
Well, it's very unnerving to say the least, knowing that an officer was present. Actually, a professor from a local college was present. There was many eyewitnesses to this. And, it sets the tone, I guess, of how dangerous this was for the family. Actions like that, the fires, the explosions, the constant disembodied voices threatening to kill the family and taunting them constantly. So whatever it was, it had very grave intentions for the Pomeranians.
I mean, talk about scary. There's another moment where you guys are separated. Cindy is indoors, and Steve, you're outside with the geoport. And Steve, you hear Cindy's name come through the geoport. That puts you on high alert. When something like that happens, what runs through your mind? Is it another spirit energy warning you that Cindy might be in danger? Is it a threat? How did you take this particular instance when you heard her name come through that geoport?
In this instance, I kind of took it as a threat personally. I feel that it took me back to the moments of going through all the reports and the audio from the 70s and hearing and learning about the family, constantly hearing their names being called over and over all night long. And then, of course, it went from just their names to threats of killing them, harming them. And I almost felt like it was, threatening her.
Yeah.
And I think because of where I was standing, I think it wanted me out of that portal area. It wanted to continue doing what it was doing. So I also think it wanted me out of there, not realizing that we were going to come back. So, her being there by herself, I really didn't like that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right with you on that one. Cindy, uh, you like to use mirrors in your investigations, whether it's scrying or looking beyond the veil. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
when you're looking and you're using mirrors to sort of figure out what's going on, is what you see in your mind's eye, or do you visually see it in the mirror?
Yeah, and for me, it's like just a point of focus to kind of let everything relax and gaze, and then the information starts coming through, usually in my mind's eye, or I'm hearing, or I'm feeling. So all of the senses are being activated. It's just giving me a focal point. So, yeah, I mean, I guess technically, if when people talk about scrying, or maybe like back in the day, it would be they would be seeing it unfold in front of them with their eyes in the mirror, not in the mind's eye.
Yeah.
But it just activates it activates my mind's eye, if that makes sense. It
Yeah, it
gives
does.
me, yeah.
So, what kind of protection do you do before you go to a location, whether it be this one or another one, to protect yourself that something doesn't follow you home, doesn't you don't get attacked, and just try to, like I said, protect yourself as much as you can.
Yeah, I'm one of those mediums who doesn't like to walk into any situation in fear, because I mean, while some of the things that we encounter are very scary, I always walk in with faith. I believe in God. I'm just like, I got this. I walk in. And then when I leave, if I feel off, I have somebody who does energy clearing for me. She's like a wizard. She's a shaman. She gets in there, cleans stuff out. But I also sometimes I don't know when something's followed me home, and that's the truth. I mean, I don't always know. And just if I can share a really quick story of something that
Absolutely.
happened. So it wasn't from this investigation, it was from a different investigation um, that I was on. I had come home and I have a really good friend in Indonesia who's a medium. She didn't know where I was filming. She knew nothing. And she called me on WhatsApp and she was like, hey, I think something's followed you home. And I was
Wow.
like, okay. She's like, it's a woman. And she goes, my brother drew this woman. Can I show you? Because her brother draws spirits. So she sent me a snapshot of this picture, and it was the exact picture of the woman from history that we had investigated in the house.
Holy
But
cow.
they wouldn't know that they're in
Yeah.
Indonesia. Like they didn't even know where we were. We were filming.
Wow.
Like this isn't even public knowledge. So I mean, I guess the reason I'm telling you this is because like mediums, we don't always know when something's followed us,
Hmm.
especially with me, where when I'm, going about my daily life, I'm not talking to spirits all the time. So I'm
Yeah.
not trying to pay attention to that. So
People think,
sometimes,
yeah, people
yeah,
think that just because you're a medium 24/7, you're constantly in tune with everything. No, you
yeah.
lead a normal life just like everybody else. You just have this
Hmm.
extra sense, an extra ability that you have that really is a gift. Steve, let's talk about the two brothers for a second, Terry and Dwayne.
Sure.
You've known them for a long time now. Have their lives been permanently altered by what happened to them in their childhood?
There's no question about that. Yeah, unfortunately, yes. I mean, I've known them going on a decade now, and we talk a lot. We talk frequently throughout the year. I even stop by and see them on holidays, things of that nature. So it's, well beyond just investigating the case, so to speak. But it's something that, I don't think we can ever have a conversation where all of this doesn't get re-talked about.
Yeah.
I think it's always on their mind, it's always in their heart. But I do think after this last investigation, there's a there's more peace. That much I can tell you. I can see it, I can sense it when I talk to them. I feel that there's more relief than I've seen yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's ingrained in them. It truly is. And I feel like not only the trauma of what they saw, what happened to them, but I think a lot of it is what they saw their parents go through, and
Yeah.
they attribute their early deaths to all the stress and the happenings from that experience.
You could really see the emotions on their face when you played back that audio tape in the documentary of their dad. And I think you even mentioned in the documentary it was both sad and a blessing to hear their father's voice again. Cindy, before we go, I'm going to leave the last question to you. Being a medium, and people who have paranormal experiences say, well, if it can do that, Why can't, I mean, who knows what else it can do? A very simple question that does not have a simple answer. Can a spirit cause you physical harm to the point where it can possibly kill you? Like that knife incident that we talked about with Steve. That knife could have been thrown at somebody.
Mhm.
Can that
Mhm.
happen?
Yes, I mean, I totally think it can happen. But I think even more kind of insidious is knowing that, how spirit kind of can get into the minds of people and manipulate the psychology, and that can become even more dangerous in my personal opinion, because
Exactly.
it's people don't always understand, like, is it me, is it spirit, so it makes people crazy. Spirits can make people crazy, and that can happen. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the malevolent ones really enjoy watching torturing people
Hmm.
and just scaring the crap out of them. I want to thank
Hmm.
the both of you so much. Wow, this 20 minutes just flew by. Again, guys, it's called Michigan Hell House. It's a new shock doc from Discovery. It's available now, streaming on Discovery Plus and on the Travel Channel. Check out this shock doc. Check out their previous one, which is on the flight 401, about the flight that went down in the Florida Everglades, and they have many more before that as well. Thank you so much to our guests, Steve Shippey and Cindy Keza. Looking forward to the next one, guys. Uh,
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I want to thank all our audience, those of you who are tuning in live and those who will be watching this later on. On behalf of Steve, Cindy, and myself, stay safe and stay walking. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.